This is Empires of the Future, looking at the church in a time of change. We actually have a theme for today, which is family obligations, traditions, including some things that are happening and how they reflect on what we deal with as a church throughout the ages, throughout our days here. And so, my name is Jackson Van Dyke. I'm here with friend Matt Castro. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. Did you have a good week?
Yeah, it's been very good.
Yeah?
A little later in the week here on Thursday than we usually get together, but
It's okay.
I like it. We just got back from lunch at USI, and that was a good time. And I understand you were just at a local place that's gaining some popularity around.
Reed Street Barbecue? Yeah, I'm a big fan of smoked meat of all kinds.
Me too.
And being from Memphis, Tennessee, which is, I would argue, the center of barbecue world. You have a certain liking to some of this food, and so this place is pretty good. Like, I'm a big favor of it. So I've heard some people who don't like it, but I don't really know what their flavors and what their palates go for. But I'm very, very satisfied with it.
I went there for the first time this week, too, and if you're unhappy with it, then I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about what you expect of barbecue, because it's a pretty good barbecue place.
Yeah. My big things is the meat good, is the sauce good. If you have bad sauces, I'm out.
Right.
Because that's again, that's kind of the heart of the meat, of the barbecue world. Yeah. You have to have good meat, and you have to have good sauce. And if you don't have good sauce, I think that's a bad thing. Yeah. So, and most Memphis barbecue places, the meat's good and the sauces are good. Yeah, so we just started this podcast, so we don't have really fell into like some patterns or trends on what we do. But for someone like myself, and I know you do as well, you watch a lot of movies and TV shows. Anything you've watched over the last week that you just want to talk about? Or
let's see,
not to get too much into this, but
I recently watched The Matrix again.
The original Matrix.
Yeah.
How old is that, by the way? 97, 99?
Yeah, it's 99, I believe. Okay. So, we're looking right around 20 years. And it holds up well.
Yeah, sure.
The Matrix, the biggest weakness is the sequels.
They're
very uneven. The sequels are really uneven. The first one, so much good going on there. And I am lowering my expectations for whatever they're going to do with this Matrix that's going to come out, I guess, a little over a year from now. But there is so much interesting stuff in that first movie. And so, it's good. It holds up well.
Yeah, and that's such a world. Well, you can go a lot of different directions with that movie story, and since you don't have like a comic books or anything, I don't know, you're not tied to anything in particular. I did get the opportunity to watch The Irishman.
Okay.
The movie, the Netflix movie, the Scorsese movie with De Niro and Pacino, and Pesci. I haven't seen Joe Pesci in a movie in forever.
Sure.
And It's a movie about Jimmy Hoffa and his disappearance or murder, based off of a book called I Heard You Paint Houses, which is I learned as a mob phrase for killing people.
Okay.
It's mentioned a few different times in the movie, but it's based off a book that has that same title, and it's basically the theory that Jimmy Hoffa, who, if you don't know, disappeared in 1975, a union boss. Died in 1975, and he disappeared in 75, but he was declared dead in 82 because they couldn't find his body.
Right.
And there was different theories on who killed him. So this particular theory is that one of his closest friends in the labor union world, who was his driver, was a known associate of the mob in Philadelphia, and he was basically ordered to assassinate Jimmy Hoffa based off Hoffa's kind of going rogue, I guess, against his mob connections, and anyway, so they had him whacked or killed, and they basically incinerated his body.
Yeah,
and hence why they couldn't find him. But there was a lot of things that came out after the book was written that this particular individual who killed him, which is the movie's about, basically admitted to this stuff later in his life before he died, and they basically, some people have come out when that book was published that that wasn't true. Some people came out and said that, he wasn't the one that killed him, and so I guess the case is still open on who killed Jimmy Hoffa and where his body is.
Right.
One of the random theories was that Hoffa was hidden under the New York Giants football stadium.
Oh, wow.
And they did some research and tried to find, I guess, FBI forensic type of experts weren't able to find any traces of human remains under the stadium and something. So it's pretty
big place.
Yeah, it's pretty big place. Yeah. And so I guess a few other places that have been theoried to be places where he has been buried, they have done investigations and cannot find any human remains.
Wow.
So interesting,
Yeah.
A little tale of 1960s, 1970s politics and mobs and different things.
So did you like the movie?
It's very long. It's like 3.5 hours long. It took me like three different occasions to finish the movie. But if you like history, history or theories on different historical events, and if you're like me, I love underworld mob things, and so like it definitely does paint the picture that a lot of what happens in the world, especially in like America, there's a mob connection underneath the surface. Like they do kind of somewhat connect with the Bay of Pigs fiasco. The mob was involved in that, trying to get back into Cuba to build hotels and build casinos in Cuba because they got pushed out when Castro took over power. And so they're the ones that they provided weapons for the rebels as they were being traded in Miami. So, it's interesting stuff, like how much is the mob really involved in certain events, like the JFK assassination. There's been thoughts that the mob had him killed. Does the mob have that much power that can actually kill a sitting president?
Right.
And so the movie doesn't necessarily get to this with a lot of depth, but there is a theory that Jimmy Hoffa was involved in JFK's assassination because of his connection with the mob, and he hated JFK. Hoffa hated JFK and was very vocal and hated his brother Robert. Okay. So, anyways, all this stuff is all that. Yeah, there's a lot going on in a 3.5 hour movie, and so, but yeah, it's a good movie to watch if you have 3.5 hours and you like that kind of stuff. So, anyways, so that's kind of what I've been watching when I'm out working or chasing kids and things like that, or reading newspaper articles about other things going on. Yeah, so this is a little different approach this week, but I think this is a pretty good way to do it. So you've read more about this little bits going on with the royal family. Yeah, huge news in Britain. Right. Huge news. But what's neat about this is it gives us a good kind of jumping off point, and it's a great example of what a lot of us face in terms of what do we do with our families, and they have to live this publicly. We all get to do this with a lot more anonymity, but it matters what we do about family. Family matters to all of us. We're all trying to manage to put our lives together, integrate our family to whatever degree make people happy. So what is going on, first of all, with them? Yeah, and I am no expert on the royal family by any means, but it's interesting. And I don't know the actual number, but it'd be interesting if if you're listening or you have a phone or something, and you can Google how many Americans watched like Harry and Meghan's wedding, right? Or who watched William and Kate's wedding. Which, if you don't know who these two people are, Harry is the younger brother or the younger son of Charles and Diana, Princess Diana, and then William is the oldest son, and he is second in succession to the throne behind his father Charles. Harry, because Harry is the second son, and William and Kate, his wife, had already had a son, George. George is actually third in line to the throne, and not Harry. Right. Harry actually gets dropped a level after George is born, and so that's an interesting little deal. And as Americans, we're so this is so foreign to us. We. They have a prime minister in Britain who doesn't do anything ceremonial, basically. We have a president who's basically prime minister and king or queen at the same time. Right. So, and so it's and we eat up political drama in the United States. But think about having a president or a family that simply just does ceremonial things. who just goes to like ceremonial events and wears fancy clothing and a fancy head garb,
right.
and showcases themselves and represents the country to the world and other people. Like, we would just like go bonkers. Our kids would be far more put on a pedestal than the kids of presidents are.
Right.
So, but what's kind of going on right now is that Harry has married an American woman.
Mm-hmm.
Meghan Markle was and I honestly knew very little about her before she got married to Harry, but she was an actress, and I don't even know if I've ever watched the show. I think she was in. I heard like maybe White Collar, one of those kind of USA, TNT type shows, kind of cable shows. She's not like a big celebrity by any means, but she had been divorced.
Right.
And if you don't know much about your British royal family history, but Queen Elizabeth's father, George, was not he actually earned his throne because his brother Edward stepped down from the throne because he married a divorced American woman.
Wow.
Yeah, I was actually looking it up here in this article and having a hard time finding it. But this is not new to this particular family of one of the royal members marrying an American woman who had been divorced.
Right.
So that's like that. At that time, actually, he stepped down from the throne so that he can marry this American divorced woman. And so Harry has chosen to marry a divorced American woman.
Right.
And not only is she a divorced American woman, but she's black. So when there's this kind of hope of that the royal family has progressed, right? Is that there's diversity now being ushered into the royal family. And but it didn't really take long for Meghan Markle to kind of not enjoy the royal family life. And I don't know how much you know about kind of what it looks like for them, but they are required, it's their duty to basically represent the British people, right? And so they'll go to like ceremonial events in the nation of Britain, or even if they'll go travel and represent the royal family or represent the Queen or represent the people of Britain to other nations. Right. And so you're very much like, yeah, you wear fancy clothes and you live in beautiful homes, but you are representing the people. Like, you're duty bound. Right.
And so before any of our very American listeners kind of go, this stuff doesn't interest me, the face of it doesn't interest me until somebody basically explained to me, okay, here's the deal though. For the British, they have a ready-made example person, a person who is supposed to represent them, and not only represent, but somebody they can look up to, or in how we dress, how we behave, what kind of manners we should have, what sort of values we ought to uphold. And that really figures in to why Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have decided to back off because it's a lot of pressure. And in our time, what is the value of somebody? And not only what is the value, but what values are they trying to uphold as a signifier of who is a British person, and what is proper behavior?
Right.
What are the right values? How should you dress? What are the traditions that we mean to uphold? And for Americans, it's so strange because we would like to say two things simultaneously. One, I don't really look up to anybody, which is this lame American attitude that I'm this individual doing everything, making it up myself. And anytime anybody tells me that, you can look at them and it's usually incredibly obvious who they do look up to and who they're trying to be like. Because if you aren't aware that you look up to certain people, well, then you are blatantly trying to dress like some celebrity or like some
Instagram model or something like that.
And so what we do in America is we have this whole host of people that we like to pick our own role models and heroes. And there's like we have like a pantheon, of people that we simultaneously would say, I have all these heroes, but I often don't even want to talk to them because I want to appear to be this rootless individual making my own way. And it's so different that the British have this pre-made, pre-selected. These are the people that we look up to, which makes their society a lot more straightforward and less of the madness that we have, where you don't know who is looking up to who, and so this is very interesting to see this young couple who's kind of going, look, we don't want anything to do with this. And I look at them and I don't know what it would be like to be in their situation, because it is a rootless age. It's a time where people just kind of go, I'm not like anybody. And they just don't want to admit it. Yeah. And for them to live in this British society that supposedly does look up to royals. And I don't, frankly, have any idea if the average British person does still look up to royals. Yeah, there are some interesting. The only reason I know this is because I've read about it for particular reasons, and it's there was a time that the royal, like the Queen and the monarch, was somewhat looked at with disdain when Princess Diana died, because they felt like the Queen showed very little emotion or remorse during that event. And of course, I mean, Queen Elizabeth, her father, if you've ever seen the movie King's Speech, which is a fantastic movie, he was a man who was king during World War II. Right. And she comes from a time and place that you weren't supposed to show emotion. A lot of them, you were supposed to show sternness and strength, right? And that's what she was. And her first prime minister when she was queen was William Churchill. That's her first prime. Yeah, Winston. Yeah. Sorry, Winston Churchill was her first prime. I mean, what do you expect? Seems like a long time ago. Yeah, it seems like a long time. But after that event, from what I've read, that polls show that the Queen has a lot of support. People continue to respect her, and I think we would think that that you would come to a point in history where she would be seen as it's not something that is important. What value does she bring? What value does the monarch bring? Does it help normal people? But stats show that people really do love the monarch and support it and think it's good for them as a nation. Hence why people, when one of the royal family members gets married, it's a huge event, right? I mean, it's one of the biggest events, of the decade, And so I think it's interesting, though, that, there's a sense where in America we think we are somewhat, we're too good for a monarch. We have a president that we elect, and and the people have power, right? And they see the monarch, or they see like the Queen of England, as someone who has like power not by vote or by creed, but not by like that people voted for, not by the will of the people, but they have power by blood. Yeah. And they see that as a negative thing. But to Britain, I think they see it as they have an institution that represents them, and they're proud of it. There's a proudness that comes to it. And I think from what I've read and seen is that the family recognizes this responsibility. They have a responsibility. Right. It's not like it's not like a privileged position where they can do whatever they want. Right. They are really they feel a sense of responsibility, and that they are and there is a sense where they are by the decree of God, and they represent that. So there's a weight, almost more than the president of the United States. In our country, there's more of a weight to what you see in Britain with the monarch. And so I think this with Harry and Meghan, there's a rejection of that responsibility. I mean, that's really what's going on. That they feel like they don't have enough independence and autonomy. Being basically ordered to do certain things, they're not allowed to do what they want and make the decisions that they think is right for them, and so they're going to leave. And basically, I know they had a big meeting. It's like Elizabeth and William and Harry and Charles. They had this meeting about what they were going to do, and I believe they're going to lose their royal titles. Like they're basically giving up their titles so they can basically be independent and have this sense of freedom that I guess they feel that they lack. Yeah. So is it true then? The only way I can make sense out of where this sense of responsibility had come from, and I think you mentioned and alluded to a part of it, is that this started from a Christian idea that basically, if you are given gifts, if you are given a position, it's not for your own ends. It is for the good of the people and under the ruling of God. That God gave it to you so that you can serve the people. Because this is reminding me, I'm still tracking on this podcast, Presidential, that we talked about last week, and there was this idea among a lot of the founders that was passed on. I can remember John Adams and John Quincy Adams. This is part of their story that the gifts that you have received are not for you.
Right.
You have a duty to serve the people, and it's not just the Adams. This is a common idea that is floated through families that have had responsibility to rule. That it was given to them by God.
Yeah.
And it's the only way that this idea can make sense as far as the origin of it.
Right.
Because I think about in our society, in American society, like this idea came to me from reading a Spider-Man comic. With great power comes great responsibility.
Sure.
Otherwise, there was no connection between power and responsibility that I had ever seen in my life. But again, as Americans, we're so different in terms of how we see the world. Yeah. And this is an old world kind of thing.
It is.
That this family has had this responsibility, and it's a major milestone for a family member to go, listen, I'm out. I don't want it.
I don't want it.
I am going to experiment here and take an attempt to just leave it behind as much as I can.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think maybe Americans will respond to this event as, you do what's best for you. But I think if you're British, I would think you would see a sense of like rejecting the duty and the responsibility that comes with it. And so, it's always interesting when the British monarch becomes kind of like, there's an important event that's happened, either it be positive or negative, and it becomes something that Americans talk about because we are so distant from the sense of a person having this power and this representation and this responsibility that they get labeled a king or queen.
We are so
and they rule a kingdom. And I know the British Empire has significantly contracted during Elizabeth's reign. But at one time, when she first was queen, actually even before she was queen, when she first got married, her and her husband had to go and tour the empire.
Right.
And they went to Egypt, and they went to parts of Africa, and they went to parts of Asia, and they went to all over these places, and she was their queen. And then so like that image of an empire, that she was a queen of a very diverse group of people, and they all looked to her as the leader of the realm.
Right.
And as Americans, we don't think in those terminologies. It's even weird going to the Bible, but who uses that terminology quite frequently. Right. Even calls Jesus king, and that he is a ruler of a kingdom.
Right. He's King of Kings. So
he's the king. Yeah,
he does have kind of sub-commanders. He has leaders, but he is the leader of leaders.
He's the leader of leaders.
And so that it shows one that there's got to be something more here than just, individualism is the end of all history. There's just atomized people just making their own way. Because, you're talking about this, and it just occurred to me, too, that this is so foreign to us because it's so foreign for Americans to think about family, history, and family obligations being absolute. It's like, no, this is the ruling family.
Right.
And those family connections, not only are they fundamentally important, that is how we determine who is the next in line for everyone. We look at family as such a malleable thing, and it's not.
Yeah.
We don't yet just have this absolute control over when our families get started and where we go and what we do and how much those connections will matter. So
it was interesting about, again, when Queen Elizabeth's sister Margaret, who's not alive, she passed away. I want to say I don't know, the early 2000s, maybe the 90s, she passed away, and she was her younger sister, and far more like, it was known that she enjoyed drinking and dancing, like that was kind of her thing, where Elizabeth is very more stern and very more disciplined and understood duty and responsibility far more. And for her to get married, she had to ask for permission to her sister.
Yeah.
Who was,
right.
She was the queen, right? And every decision that each member made affected the queen, which then affected the entire country. And so you're seeing Harry and Meghan making decisions that they think they're just making independent decisions that affect them, but it doesn't affect them. It affects the queen, which therefore affects the entire country at large. And so I think that's why this. It's even interesting while this is going on. William and Kate, William is Harry's older brother. They understand because if you don't know, Kate does not come from royalty.
Right.
She's a commoner.
Right.
But she understood quite quickly what her duty was. And
we Americans are of a different sort.
This is the part that I think is the far more interesting one. It's not, Harry and Mary wanted to move out. I think it's the American element that's involved here. Yeah. That the American doesn't feel comfortable in this world of responsibility and duty.
Yeah.
And Harry, which is so fascinating about Harry was in the British military.
Right.
Like he was an officer, I believe, in the British military. And I basically carved out an identity through that service. So he gets service and responsibility, but his choice of marrying Meghan, which at the moment when it happened, the thought was, oh, look at the royal family, look at the diversity it's becoming more progressive. But yet, now we've come to a point where Meghan and Harry are making a decision we're not thinking what's best for the whole. They're thinking what's best for them as individuals. And I don't know are we coming to, and I think you made a good point, the end all is not just vast individualism. And is it modern and progressive for people to make individual decisions where they're trying to find what they're basically saying freedom and autonomy is more important than responsibility and sacrifice and duty. Right. Is that a positive evolution, or
Well, and so
is that the definition of progressivism or modernism?
Right.
That's kind of the question.
To ground this, personally, it's I did not realize for my own life what it would mean for me to have moved to another state, and it's an hour and a half. But what that does to be an hour and a half from my mom and my dad, and from my wife's parents and her extended family, is that my kids are growing up in a fundamentally different atmosphere than I did.
Absolutely.
I grew up with certainly my mom's mother, my maternal grandmother she's the second most important influence in my life, without a doubt. My mom is the first. My parents were divorced from when I was very young, 5. And the second most important influence in my life I called her Mama. Miss her every day.
Yeah.
And to look now, and this is my own short-sightedness, that until I had kids, I didn't even think about the fact that none of their grandparents can be in their life every day, and how just drastically that will make their life look different than mine if this continues in this way. And it is a loss for my boys that they don't know of, and this is just one of many things that this story reminds me about. When you take family for granted, and then just kind of, it is so American to just go, well, I hope that'll all get packaged in there somehow.
Yeah, sure.
To just have this positive idea that hopefully it'll all come together somehow. When certainly one thing I can take away from when we're talking about responsibilities and duties, if there is a loss in my boy's life, it's on me for making the decision to come here and to uproot myself and our family, because we make decisions that affect people in our lives, and that is what it is. That you carry with you the responsibility of those decisions, and so at the end of the day, one thing I look at this situation and I kind of go, wow, we all are doing this too. We have family backgrounds. We don't often think about how they have affected us, and we make decisions that will affect our kids and future generations without a whole lot of thought, because it is, I think, just as it is pretty American to put duty and responsibility in the backseat, it's pretty American to put family uh, as a whole in the backseat of your life and just kind of hope that it comes along as well. So I can imagine some of, even though obviously I don't know her and know very little about her, and I can imagine a little bit of Meghan Markle's mindset. In this is what we do as Americans. We don't understand. We don't think too much about the role that our family has played in our life to help us become who we are, and where that's all going to go, and what's going to happen with that as we go forward, and we have kids and all of that.
Yeah, I can't remember the author of the article, and I can't remember the title of the article, but it was on Gospel Coalition, and it was discussing the issue of home, and basically talking about in our transient world where, even taking this issue, you take this issue and you put it in 19th century Britain, that's never going to happen. No way is the wife of one of the royal families going to cause them to move across the pond to Canada. Like, that's just the options. There's no planes. It's just that world. It would never have happened this way, right? But we live in a world where it's so easy to pick up and go and to move and to find another place to live and to make your home. But we think of home as only perfectly like, well, I'm living in a place and I work in a place. But there's so much more to home. And the author was writing about the article was like, I think in our role today, we really struggle to define where is home. For you, it's Southern Illinois. That's where you're from. You just kind of talked about that. If you know me at all, I'm going to talk a lot about Tennessee. It's where I lived a lot of my life, where my wife, it's lived most of her life. And there's a sense where, and my kids, it's so funny that they've never lived in Tennessee. Right. But yet to them, they're going, oh, we're going to Tennessee. Like it's like this place that we talk about a lot. They live in Indiana. Right. But they recognize that their grandparents live in Tennessee. They recognize that their parents went to school in Tennessee, and they don't understand that all too much. But they realize that when we go on vacation, often we go to Tennessee. There is a sense where, to them, they may not associate it with some of these bigger ideas, but there's a sense where that's probably where we probably feel the most comfortable, because it's how we define home. But because of certain circumstances and decisions, we live in a different state. We don't live around our family. And our kids don't live around their cousins, and they don't live around their aunts and uncles, and they don't live around their grandparents. And that is an impactful thing in a very significant way. And I don't know if that is a trend that will change, if we will eventually kind of move to a point where like transientness is led to it's just led to a lot of like, I don't know where I'm from. Right. And when you don't feel comfortable where you live, I don't know if you call that home. Right. Home seems like the definition of a home is like a shalom, a sense of peace and a sense of security. And Israel really felt that, when the promised land was home, right? A sense of protection and security. And so I think it is an issue that isn't really talked about at a high level. But I think it is an issue that as more people move into urban cities and leave their families, their families where they come from in these rural towns or wherever these places are, people are really going to struggle with this identity issue because they're just where they grew up and who they lived around to find who they are. And if they pick up and leave in these areas that have no roots in, it's even hard for your kids to really feel like they're in a home. Right. So yeah, I think it's this, I don't know, maybe this will cause a stir with people to go, is making more money and getting more promotion worth living in these urban massive cities, and where there's just no definition of home.
Right.
It's just so lacking and stuff. So
yeah, and two things to tie this back together. Like, one of kind of my life philosophies is that you got to embrace the tension that's in your life. That you should not behave as if the stressors that you would be better off if they were gone. And so, for instance, in this situation, one of the things that is just kind of a goal that's at mid-level in my life. You can't make it the top just because you can't control other people's lives, but a mid-level goal that is there for my family as well as my wife's family is that we move them here, or that somehow we end up closer together. I've seen through being at First Southern, a lot of families I've been really impressed with when their parents or grandparents get older, they at least make the effort to move that family member into their home.
Sure.
Before you go for what I would call the nuclear option, which is put them in a nursing home. It's there's a lot that happens in that situation. I know that it is a thing that has to be done, dependent on circumstances. But I can tell you that I appreciate every family that at least makes the attempt to have that family member living with them in the home. That's huge, and I think that's a good tension to have in your life, to just go, I want that, because I can tell you for me that this is the second thing that to tie back in a previous part of this conversation about being honest about who your heroes are is my advice. Just about, rather than acting as if you don't have people you look up to, I can tell you that there's a fierceness about my grandmother loved with a fierce sort of attitude. She was a fighter, and she taught me that love is tenderness, but it is also you fight for the people that you care about. And I got that. I can see that in my aunt and in my mother. And there's an intensity that carries on. And so that my grandmother is one of the heroes in my life that I look up to, as well as my cousin Brad. But then also these unrealistic heroes that we have. It's totally fine to have heroes that you've never met. For me, like a Rich Mullins or a C.S. Lewis or a J.R.R. Tolkien.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I also try to tie in pastors that have been amazing to me, like Glenn Flowers, Jerry Ford. And this is, I think, the answer, that we all are open with each other about who we do look up to, and that I am a person who is a long line and a whole lot of other people, and that's how it works. The strangest thing about this is that I think it is uniquely pretty American to even buy this idea that you are, quote, self-made.
Yeah, sure.
That's not a thing. Yeah. But we're kind of the people that made up this idea.
Right.
And that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's just so funny because even if you wanted to say there was some genesis moment of this, there isn't really. I mean, the founding fathers were not self-made men. Jefferson was wealthy before he was the writer of the Declaration of Independence. George Washington had a military career before the Revolutionary War. Right. And a lot of the others, like they came from wealth, or they came from money, or they came from intellectual families. Like even John Adams and Abigail, they were both well educated. Right. Both went to Harvard. I know John went to Harvard. Yep. So it's not like these were like simple farmers who happened to cause a revolution. It's just not what happened.
Right. You have some characters. There's
Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. He's popular. I saw his show. Great, by the way. If you have a chance to go see it, it's worth however much money you have to spend. But he was somewhat of a self-made man. I get that. But he was one of the rarities.
Right. Andrew Jackson as well. This guy went through some stuff. He didn't have a whole lot of help in his life. But this is not that common. And in fact, most of the stories that you hear are made up stories about these sorts of things. And even then, when these people, say Andrew Jackson takes on a regiment, well, those people listen to him. So, I mean, there are always people that are around you that help to make you successful.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
And I am all about people working as hard as they can.
Yeah, sure.
But this is not a productive or helpful story to just be like, no, I did this all myself. That's just a lie. And I think that we Americans tend to buy it because we want it. We like it.
Yeah.
It sounds great.
Yeah.
And that's just another level of hubris that as you look back in history, there have always been impressive people, and that's totally fine. But the next level that I think we've come upon is like, yeah, you know what would be great if man, I mean, this is in some ways probably our obsession with superheroes, because look at them, you know, they're doing it all on their own, just like me, just like I'm doing my life all on my own, and it's like that's just not the case.
Yeah, if you're interested in this topic, I would encourage you to read Malcolm Gladwell's book on, I think it's called Outliers. He talks about some of these major figures, not kind of in history and stuff, but he talks about it's not necessarily even like, all right, you have certain people in your life that are helpful. It's all about timing. You know, he talks about the Beatles. He said the reason why the Beatles became so great is because they happened to, number one, be in the same town. Yeah. That's, remarkable. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that they happened to be able to get gigs at this particular club, and were able to play and play and play and play and play, and were able to kind of create this creative fusion that they were able to do based off because they had particular people that were able to be helpful to them when they needed it, and they were at the right place at the right time. Right. And so, this idea of like, I'm going to go out and set my own course is just so anti-historical. Mm-hmm. And it's also just not reality. And it seems like people who claim this are ones who already sit in a simple level of prosperity. Right. So they already have this huge foundation of wealth and status. Then they make these claims, or I'm going to go off and make myself. It's like, well, because you're already something, So it's almost, there's no risk in a sense, and so almost like even this issue with Harry and Meghan. They're able to even claim some of these things because number one, they're still going to be paid by the royal family to an extended point, and they have options, so they can go and and do whatever their heart's desires, so.
Well, before we leave this behind, tell me a few of your heroes, and I know one thing about it. I know we all have a lot, and so it's not as if you have to have them ranked ahead of time. Just a few of who it would be.
So as a kid, man, I was such, and this is boys who play sports, man. So a lot of them are sports related. So I ran track and when I was a kid and was pretty good at it, and I really, and I never met him. I know you had a few you never met, but Eric Little, the Scottish runner, who was a missionary in China, was my hero.
Okay, and
from Chariots of Fire,
Chariots of Fire,
was my hero. And still to this day would look to him as like, very much inspiration. Cool. So that's a really, I don't know a lot of flaws that Eric Little had. So but he was just someone I looked up to at a particular time in my life. Peyton Manning, I know that sounds silly, but again, for a lot of boys who grew up in Tennessee, when I was in middle school, Peyton Manning was he was the definition of the all-American male, right? Yeah. He played sports, he succeeded, he was smart, he was polite, he was modest, all humble. Like, if your mom could write it could describe the type of man they wanted their sons, they would go to Peyton Manning. Mm-hmm. Like, you just, that was for like kids that are a little bit older, a little bit younger. It was Tim Tebow maybe, but for us in Tennessee, it was Peyton Manning, and still kind of looked to him as somewhat of a hero. I would say like politically, some of reading about George Washington and some of the things that he stood for are just so helpful as a leader.
A man who understood his place and was willing to. You want to talk about like a role player, man? A guy who just went, look, here's what's most important: that I don't make waves and I make this thing look respectable, and then leave. Yeah. Oh man.
That again, going back to the show Hamilton, it's so fascinating about great leaders. You can go show about Hamilton. It's called Hamilton. It's about Alexander Hamilton. And the most prominent, powerful character in that show is George Washington. Mm-hmm. And it's because, and it's not because he was president and he was general, but because of his deep character and integrity, that you just put the person in a show. Mm-hmm. and he just takes over. He's such a powerful figure. There's certain characteristics about him. And I know this for some people who maybe hated his guts. I still think George W. Bush is. I get some of his politics. Maybe you disagree with the Iraq War, but and there's people. It's so interesting. Like even Ellen DeGeneres went to a football game with George W. Bush. I think last year to a couple games and got so much flack about it. And she basically said, "Well, he's one of my friends. I mean, I don't agree with everything he says, but we're friends." And you can tell if Ellen DeGeneres, who's fairly progressive and liberal, and is gay and is married her gay partner, if she can love and respect George W. Bush, who has totally different politics, you could tell something about him as a person that his enemies respect and honored him, and I think that is something quite profound that for me, he was the first president I ever voted for. He was the first president I gave money to. And I think that will always be instrumental to me, especially if you know me and I actually decided to be a poli-sci major because of the 2000 election.
Sure.
Because that moment was
and then
of course 9/11 was such a prominent event in my life growing up, So, and I could probably mention far more, just heroes. And, when it comes to ministry, really going back to Eric, and there's always those little heroes, people that don't know who those people are, that are profound and impactful people. They've never written a book, and no one will remember their names, but they shaped your life in a powerful way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
That's really good. I feel the same way about certain presidential figures. I think Ronald Reagan.
Sure.
Look, it's the same idea. You don't have to agree with every one of his policies, but one thing that I really hope comes back, and it cannot come too soon, is an understanding that whoever you are, this is a cliche now, but there is a dignity to the office.
Yeah.
And you need to have a standard of behavior and composure because you are a part of something bigger than yourself that will continue on even if this is your last day. And that is presently. I mean, that is just the thing that Donald Trump receives the most criticism for, and the thing that he deserves the most criticism for seems to have no understanding that he is a part of something bigger. Yeah. And Ronald Reagan, without a doubt, understood that you need to compose yourself, as did Jimmy Carter, even somebody who would be considered not a great president like Jimmy Carter. Yeah. These men came from a time when, my goodness, they listened to the people who told them, now listen, there's a dignity to this office.
I think there's a place where Democrats probably don't admit this in public, but there's a lot of similarities between Donald Trump and Bill Clinton when it comes to just certain actions of just disrespect for the office. Right. The issue with President Clinton, sure, having an affair against his wife is bad. Sleeping with an intern is bad. Lying about it is bad. But I think the bigger issue was just he did all those things knowing what role and position he had and did it anyways. Yeah. And I think that, I'm going to guess he wasn't the first president to have an affair against his wife while sitting in. I get that. You
have to guess about that.
Yeah, yes. I get that. But I think that is a huge issue of just basically, I want to do what I want, and I like to have sex with women, and just because I'm president doesn't going to stop me from what I'm going to do. I think that's a problem. And I think Elizabeth, as a queen, is a great representation of leadership. That she understands that she doesn't get to do whatever she wants. Yeah. She's duty bound. Yeah. And I think even in one of the issues, I think why, and I know that some people love Mark Driscoll as a pastor. One of my issues with Mark Driscoll is I think there's an issue of disrespect being a pastor. Mm-hmm. There's certain words you can't use. Yeah. There's certain things you shouldn't talk about with a certain language because it's disrespectful to what it means to be a pastor and be in pastoral ministry and having that leadership and responsibility, which is still duty bound. There's sacrifice. This is not your pulpit to be able to say whatever you want. That no matter we're limited in what we say because we speak the word of God. We don't just speak our opinions. And so I think that I think there's a lot of applications in life when it comes to like, what is your duty and responsibility in this situation? What role do you have, and what limits do you have because of that role?
And I think what we are working out, like most all the people I know right now, are trying to work out, what do we do with the fact that I can make my innermost thoughts available in many ways to as many people as I kind of see fit through social media and other means. Absolutely. We have all these communication methods. Should I do that? What is that for? And the thing, about British people, for instance, I remember in reading a lot of C.S. Lewis's writings that British people look very tightly knit and strung up really tight, even to Irish and people who surround Britain. That is a characteristic of the British people, and there's a certain philosophy that exists in this kind of people, which is basically you show your innermost emotions to the people that are really close to you. Otherwise, absolutely, put on a face. Yeah, and you should just really speak and use your words to explain yourself to the average person in public. And what we are working out now in living the ways that we live, in integration technology and all the things, is, okay, if we're not going to do that, what are we going to do? And right now it's still just the wild, wild west. There are no rules. There's no rules. And there have to be, some rules have to be coming. Yeah. Because this is chaos. And you're seeing right now how much it's chaos, because there will be some story every week of some faux pas or some major rule that gets broken. It's unwritten. And it's just, they call in. Yeah. It's like the hit squad. If you ever, anybody who knows Star Trek The Next Generation, Worf has to walk through this whole group of other Klingons who are going to just jab him with with cattle prods, basically. And that's what we do right now. We don't know. This is our only kind of way of disciplining people, is we just beat them up. Yeah. And about a week is what you get. Yeah. Because we'll probably find somebody else next week. Yeah. But man, if you find yourself on the wrong end of breaking some social rule that is really fluid right now, but sorry for you if you didn't realize. Yeah. And that's just where we are. I pray and I hope that this is not the way it is in 10 years, because this is ridiculous. There's no means for redemption. No, there's no means for redemption. There's only the, sorry, pal, you're done, and we're going to beat you up, and then we're going to leave you. I mean, you want to talk about this is like a Good Samaritan type story. Like, this person's on the side of the street, and everybody just look forward and walk on by, because we have nothing to do with that person now. Yeah, they're absolutely done. Yeah, they're done. And listen, I mean, we are the people as Christians who say, there's grace. Listen, there's grace. Yeah. Sins can be forgiven. Yeah. There's somebody who took the punishment for sins. Yeah. What heinous sins, horrible sins? Yeah, those too. Yeah, those too. I know. I believe me. It sickens me too. A lot of the stuff that I see done, I go, yes, I get it. Yeah, there's an interesting, and again, want to pipe the Irishman again. At the end of the movie, the character Frank, played by Robert De Niro, is basically in a nursing home. He's fairly old. His wife has passed away. One of his children won't talk to him because she identifies him as someone who's killed people, and she wants something to do with him. And he's talking to a Catholic priest about forgiveness, and he's confessing murders. Yeah. Legitimately murders that he was ordered to do. It's not like he was like, I hate this person and I'm killing them, but I was ordered by the mob boss, and I'm not saying it's okay to kill people because your mob boss tells you to, but it's interesting. He recognized that he did something wrong and asked for forgiveness. Yeah. And there's a moment the priest says, your sins are forgiven. Right. Because the gospel saves you from, if you were, a mob hitman and you kill people and you recognize that, that was evil and wrong. Right. Christ is sufficient for that. He forgives you for that sin. So, I think it is an interesting world of there's consequences for your actions, but there is no redemption. Right. Don't ask for it. You're not going to get it. That's right. And we're in a really primitive moral state right now. I mean, we really are really in some sort of base tribal paganism where it's just
Yeah.
kind of like every once in a while we decide that somebody is really bad. We drag them in. We all go, hey, don't we all agree that this person's really bad and that we're about to do something really bad to them? Yeah, we do. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
And then we don't kill them physically, but socially, you basically kill them.
They're done.
And then they are a leper left to not interact in any sort of in any sort of way that is, you need to be done off of social media, whatever channels you had gotten in before. We want you out of those.
Yeah.
We don't have anything to do with you anymore. I hope this progresses and that we at least begin to explore and see in clear ways what we are doing, because right now all that I ever see done is you run somebody through, throw them to the side, and look for the next person. That is a week to week. You can predict it. I mean, it's so awful. You can predict it now because there are politicians who are still in office because their week came. They managed to survive the week, hoping that somebody else would do something really dumb, and some of them got their wish.
Yeah.
And then the mob moved on.
Yeah.
And they kind of went, I never even had to say I was particularly sorry.
Yeah.
I just kind of like went and hid.
Yeah.
And you all are predictable.
Yeah.
This is not justice.
Yeah.
This is mob justice.
Yeah.
I mean, and not mob like you've been talking about, but just crazed mob justice.
Yeah.
And man, I hope that we get beyond it, just because there are better places that we can get to.
Yeah. And I know, we probably need to wrap this up, and but an interesting thing to kind of conclude with is that I just, I know that you don't really get into Oscar nominations and stuff too much, but then like the movie that'll probably win the most Academy Awards in a few weeks is The Joker. A movie about basically a mentally disturbed psychopath.
Yeah.
Who life is a joke, and this idea that which I've not seen the movie, but I hear it's extremely dark, extremely violent.
Yep.
It's weird. We live in a culture that, based off all the things you just said, while at the same time, people are, let's just call it like obsessed or craving a movie that's it's not that there's no good guy. It's about a villain.
Yep.
It's about an origin story of a villain. Mm-hmm. And do people sympathize with it? Like, what is the obsession with it? It made, I don't know how much money it made. Close to $1 billion. It made like all this money. Mm-hmm. It's going to be nominated for all these awards. Therefore, it's being somewhat honored and promoted, and it's interesting. Like,
yeah, it's a big problem.
It's
because no matter how you slice it, there is a fascination with madness and evil, mm-hmm. and how are these things related? I will now say to a college student or a young person that when we're talking about just evil things that happen, we tend to say when a mass shooting happens, oh wow, that's just crazy. It's like, no, it's not crazy. It's evil. And we're all capable of it. And that's what's so strange about it, is we have all managed to convince ourselves basically that we're not capable of too much evil. And I think there's a part of us that kind of goes, well, wait a second, you know?
Yeah.
And so then you watch this movie and you kind of go, wow, this guy, I can see all the steps, having seen the Joker, I can see all the steps of how he just succumbs to evil. And you are fascinated because you're like, I don't know, could that happen to me? Yes, it could. But then there's a part of you that disbelieves that. It probably couldn't happen to me. And so I do think what is so sad is that we're so self-obsessed that we are completely fascinated by any track that we could take in life. And that this is a track that nobody's exactly done before, to say, here is step by step the descent into evil and madness. Yeah. And he is played as a sympathetic character, which, here's one thing strange about that. I like movies where you can go, listen, evil is nuanced, because it is. Evil inside of each of us will convince us that it's not nearly as evil as it is. And so that's fine too. My biggest problem with the movie is to come to the end of it and to kind of go, well, sometimes evil wins, and what can you do?
Yeah.
And that is not why we have been given stories we all know that horrible things happen. You can tune into your news every night and find that, look, short stories of evil happen all the time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The reason that we will go to movies where the good guys win is there are hints, and there is from behind the bushes, there's a shaking that tells us, what if the good guys could win in the end?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a voice that's worth listening to. It's just that we're in a non-moment where people are kind of going, well, but who knows? What if it's just all meaningless and nothingness? Well, despair's out there. I think we know that.
Yeah.
But yes, it is a strange moment when The Joker is the most popular movie of the year.
Yeah, it does create a sense we're in this culture season of extreme pessimism, and we see pessimism in Washington. We see pessimism coming out of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. We see pessimism coming out of news, 24-hour news. I know you don't watch as much sports as I do, but even news, sports, there's a more focus on the negative. Yep. O.J. Simpson or whatever the character of the year, the character of the week. It's mostly let's show you how bad this is. Right. There's a sense where, and I think you see it in people. Like there's more people that I talk to. There's a level of pessimism reigns supreme. If it will go wrong, it will go wrong.
Right, and
there's no hope that it will go right or good.
Mm. We are participating, all of us, in an experiment of what happens when an entire enormous group of people just lives off cynicism.
Yeah.
Off of the expectation it'll probably go wrong. Listen, you would be stupid if you just kept your hopes up.
Yeah. Because you're a fool.
It'll probably go wrong, and
you're a fool.
And wow, are we going to find out where that road is going? Because we're just on it. I mean, that's cynicism. It is considered wise. I mean, it just frankly is. It is considered wise to be cynical.
Yeah, right now. I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
and that has not been the case in America. First of all,
no,
that was not the case. For a long time. And,
I mean, the 1960s. What was the? It wasn't. Well, most likely we'll get to the moon, and when we get there, it'll blow up. Like that wasn't the. It was. We are going to get to the moon. Right. Like we are going to beat the Russians. Yes. Like that was always the. Right. That was always the push and the forward thinking.
My namesake is a guy named Jackson Browne, who was one of the love generation of the 60s and the 70s, one of the best songwriters of that era, just below kind of James Taylor and Bob
Running
Dylan.
Empty,
Running on Empty.
I know that from the Forrest Gump movie. Yeah.
One of the lines that has stuck with me from his songs is, whatever happened to all the changes that we thought love would bring.
Yeah.
And that this generation, in a lot of ways, this is not a story that's told too often, but this generation feels they've been left behind too.
Oh, yeah.
Because the 60s and the 70s were really about, guys, we're going to have a better future. We're going to make some changes.
Right.
Our parents have accepted that there's just going to be war. And, boy, they have been left behind too. And that's not talked about too often, but they have. There was an optimism that really did change and has changed. It is, you and I just know this, and it's not just people who are yours and my age, but if you go younger than us, those college students right now would look at you and say, listen, you better dial back that optimism.
Yeah.
None of us expects it to get better.
Yeah.
That is just where we are right now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's, even the movie like The Joker, is almost like this. Coming out of the 70s, which was a very pessimistic time as well. Mm-hmm. Putting that character in that time period and then presenting it to this generation, it's like, let's take a pessimistic, very dark character, let's drop it in a pessimistic world, and then we're going to give it to you, the pessimistic audience. Yep. It's like this, that's the market.
Yep.
And it's like, thinking of my children and trying to introduce them to optimism and even teach them about times of history where there was optimism and positive forward thinking, building and creating and forming and all these different things. I think that's stuff that kids need to know, especially if you are Christian. I mean, we believe in a hopeful gospel and a hopeful kingdom come, right?
And like so many other things, it seems that what we have is Christian hope is where we have to start because general optimism is pretty much gone.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And that's where we are.
American dream.
Yeah.
That's not going to take anyone anywhere.
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, I gotta go pick up my kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. This has been Empires of the Future.
Yeah. This has been Jackson Van Dyke and Matt Castro, and we'll be back next week.
Great.
All right.